The council scrambled. They sent their best technicians to Helios Minor. They tried to bypass the locks. They even attempted to copy the system from old schematics, but the humans had never shared full blueprints. Too risky, Lena Ruiz had once said. If this falls into the wrong hands, someone could turn breathable air into poison. The council had rolled their eyes. Now they wished they'd listened. After 3 days, oxygen levels dropped so low that the colony had to be evacuated. Thousands fled to orbiting stations. Crops withered. Animals died. The loss was massive. And it was only the beginning. Next came the trade routes. Human freighters had once carried nearly 40% of all non-military cargo across the Serpentis Corridor, a dense, asteroid-filled stretch of space where navigation required split-second decisions. Human pilots used a mix of instinct, AI, and something they called gut feeling. The council had always mocked that phrase. Logic, they believed, was enough. But when human ships vanished, automated concordance freighters took over. They followed strict flight paths, recalculating only when absolutely necessary. Within weeks, 2 collided with rogue debris. Then a third missed a gravity slingshot and drifted into deep space. Insurance costs soared. Merchants complained. Prices rose. The council tried to hire pilots from other species, but none had the same reflexes or adaptability. A Vorn pilot would calculate every possible outcome before acting. By then, it was too late. A Zentari would follow orders exactly, even if the situation changed. Only humans seemed to thrive in chaos. Then came the silence from the outer colonies. On Viridia Station, a research outpost orbiting a gas giant, scientists relied on human-made biostabilization fields to keep native microbes from infecting the crew. The fields ran on a monthly update from Earth's medical network. Without it, the filters grew weak. A minor cough turned into a fever, then into hemorrhagic lesions. Within a month, half the station was sick. The council sent medicine, but it didn't work. The pathogen had mutated in ways their models couldn't predict. Chloe Wright watched the reports pile up on her terminal. She sat alone in her room, surrounded by old human data pads and half-empty coffee cups. She remembered Paul Dawson saying, "They'll only miss us when the lights go out." She hadn't believed him then. Now she did. She tried to help. She translated old maintenance logs. She explained human logic to confused engineers. But every time she offered a solution, someone would say, "That seems inefficient," or "Why would they design it that way?" They still didn't understand. Humans didn't just build things to work, they built them to care. Marcus Bell, still on Helios Minor, received a message from Chloe. It was simple. "They're starting to listen," he replied. "Too late for pride, not too late for humility." On Xylos Prime, Krell stood before the council again. This time his voice was quieter. "We assumed humanity was a guest in our galaxy," he said. "But what if we were the guests in theirs?" No one answered. Outside, the sky darkened. Somewhere, a relay station flickered and died. The first starship in 6 months failed to check in. And in the silence that followed, the council finally heard what they had ignored for so long, the echo of absence and the weight of what they had lost. A year had passed since the humans left, and the cracks in the concordance were no longer small. They were deep, wide, and spreading fast. What had begun as minor glitches had grown into full system failures, and the council could no longer pretend they were in control. The galaxy, once humming with smooth efficiency, now sputtered like an old engine running on fumes. The quantum relay network was the first major collapse. These relays, strung across star systems like invisible threads, allowed instant communication between worlds. Without them, messages took weeks or months to arrive by courier ship. The relays had been designed and maintained by human engineers for over a century. The council had always assumed they were self-sustaining. They were wrong. The truth was, the relays needed constant micro-adjustments, tiny corrections based on solar flares, gravitational shifts, and cosmic radiation. Humans had built AI assistants to handle most of it, but those AIs required human oversight. They learned from human intuition, from patterns that logic alone could not predict. When Earth went silent, the AIs began to degrade. At first, signals slowed. Then they distorted. Now entire sectors were cut off. On Xylos Prime, emergency broadcasts flickered in and out. Delegates shouted over broken comms, trying to coordinate responses to crises they barely understood. High Arbiter Krell sat in his private chamber, staring at a blank screen where a report from the outer rim should have appeared. His hands, usually steady, trembled slightly. He remembered dismissing Paul Dawson's warning about over-reliance on human infrastructure. Now, that warning felt like a ghost whispering in his ear. Then came the navigation crisis. The Serpentis Corridor, once a busy trade lane, was now a graveyard of stranded ships. Automated freighters drifted aimlessly, their navigation systems confused by shifting magnetic fields they could not interpret. Human pilots had used a mix of star charts, real-time sensor data, and something they called feel for the void. The Council had called it superstition. Now without it, no one dared enter the corridor. Trade between major worlds slowed to a crawl. Food shortages began on planets that depended on off-world imports, but the worst was yet to come. On Viridia Station, the bio-outbreak had spread beyond containment. The pathogen, once held back by human-designed filters, had mutated into something new, something that ignored standard antivirals. Dozens died each day. The station's medical team sent desperate pleas for help, but the Council had no answers. Their science was precise, clean, and rigid. It could not adapt to chaos. Chloe Wright watched the death toll rise from her small room on Xylos Prime. She had begged the Council to let her access old human medical archives. They refused at first, calling it sentimental nonsense. But as more stations reported similar outbreaks, they finally gave in. Chloe spent nights hunched over her terminal, scrolling through files labeled Project Mercy and BioShield Alpha. She found notes in Lena Ruiz's handwriting, simple explanations, analogies, even jokes scribbled in the margins. Viruses are like kids, one note read. They break rules just to see if you're paying attention. Chloe tried to explain this to the Council scientists. You can't just attack the pathogen, she said during a tense briefing. You have to outthink it. Predict its next move. Humans treated biology like a conversation, not a war. The lead scientist, a Vorn named Dr. Torrell, scoffed. Conversations do not sterilize pathogens. Maybe not, Chloe replied. But they keep people alive. Her words fell on deaf ears. Days later, Viridia Station went dark. All contact ceased. The Council declared it lost. Meanwhile, on Helios Minor, Marcus Bell still lived in his maintenance hut. The colony remained evacuated, the atmosphere processors silent, but Marcus hadn't been idle. He'd been collecting data on power grids, on water purifiers, on climate regulators, all systems that had begun failing across the concordance. He noticed a pattern. Every failing system had one thing in common. It had been touched by human hands. He sent a message to Chloe, not through official channels, those were too slow, but through an old emergency band humans had built into every concordance outpost. It was a backdoor meant for disasters. The Council didn't even know it existed. They're all connected, Marcus wrote. The relays, the biofilters, the navigation AIs, they share a core protocol. It's called the Harmony Layer. Humans built it to make systems talk to each other, to share warnings, to adapt together. Without Earth's central node, the layer is decaying, like a body without a brain. Chloe read the message 3 times. Then she ran to the Council chamber, waving the printout like a flag. Krell listened this time. He looked older, his silver eyes dull with exhaustion. Can it be fixed? He asked. Not without human help, Chloe said. But maybe we can slow the decay. If we reroute power from non-essential systems, if we manually update key nodes, we might buy time. The Council argued for hours. Some called it a waste. Others said it was too late. But Krell, for the first time, overruled them. Do it, he said. Chloe and Marcus worked together across light years, guiding concordance technicians through repairs they barely understood. They taught them how to listen to machines, how to spot the tiny signs of failure before it was too late. It was slow, messy work, full of trial, error, and frustration. But for the first time in months, something worked. A relay flickered back to life near the Cygnus Reach. A water purifier on Thalos III began producing clean output again. Hope, fragile and thin, returned. But then came the final blow. Deep in the core systems, the orbital habitat Viridia, not the station, but the habitat bearing the same name, suffered a catastrophic failure in its life support grid. The harmony layer there had collapsed completely. Oxygen recyclers shut down, temperature controls failed. Within hours, over 2,000 lives were lost. The news spread like fire. Panic erupted on dozens of worlds. People demanded answers. The council had none. Chloe stood on a balcony overlooking the city of Xylos Prime. The lights below flickered, another minor power dip. She thought of Earth, quiet and distant, raw, hid in its own peace. She wondered if Paul and Lena knew what was happening. She hoped they didn't. She hoped they were happy, but she also knew the truth now. The humans hadn't just built machines. They had built a web of care, woven into every system, every code, every design. They had left quietly, but they had left everything holding the galaxy together. And now, without them, the whole thing was coming undone. Desperation finally broke the Council's pride. After the Viridia habitat disaster, the death toll could no longer be hidden and the failing systems could no longer be ignored. Worlds that once mocked human emotion now begged for human help. High Arbiter Krell called an emergency session not to debate but to act. "We must go to Earth," he said, his voice low and stripped of its usual certainty. "We must ask." A small envoy was assembled. Krell himself, Dr. Torrell, and Chloe Wright, who insisted on coming. They boarded the fastest ship the Concordance had, a sleek diplomatic cruiser named the Dawn Accord. As it left orbit, Chloe looked back at Xylos Prime, its crystalline towers dimmer than she remembered. She wondered if Earth would even let them land. The journey to Sol system took 3 weeks. During that time, Krell barely spoke. He studied old human records, watched archived footage of Paul Dawson's speeches, and reread Lena Ruiz's scientific papers, now treated like sacred texts. He saw something he had missed before, not chaos but care, not noise but nuance. Humans didn't just solve problems. They asked if the problem should exist at all. When the Dawn Accord crossed the edge of Earth's solar system, they were met with silence. No hails, no warnings, just quiet. Then, without fanfare, a single human vessel appeared on their sensors, small, unarmed, and painted white. It matched speed with them and sent a simple message: follow. They were led past Jupiter, past Mars, and finally into Earth orbit. The planet below was green and blue, wrapped in clouds, spinning gently in the sunlight. Cities glittered along coastlines, but there were no massive orbital weapons, no fleets waiting in the dark. Just peace. The envoy landed in a field near the Pacific Ocean, not in a grand capital or military base, but in a quiet coastal town. Paul Dawson waited for them there, standing alone beside a wooden bench under a wide oak tree. He wore simple clothes, jeans and a light shirt, and held a cup of steaming drink in his hands. He looked older, calmer, like a man who had finally stopped carrying the weight of others. Krell stepped forward first. His usual armor was gone. He wore plain robes, a sign of humility his species rarely showed. "Paul Dawson," he said, his translator softening his deep voice. "We have come to ask for your help." Paul nodded slowly. "I figured you would." He gestured to the bench. "Sit." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind and the distant crash of waves. Birds flew overhead. A dog barked somewhere down the road. It was so ordinary, so human, that Krell felt strangely out of place. "We were wrong," Krell finally said. "We thought your ways were weak. We thought emotion made you fragile. But without you, the galaxy is breaking. Not from war, but from silence. From systems that no one understands, from problems that logic alone cannot fix." Paul took a sip of his drink. "We offered to teach you. For decades, we shared everything, our science, our code, our methods. But you only took what you thought was useful. You threw out the rest, the empathy, the flexibility, the idea that machines should serve life, not just function." Dr. Torrell shifted uncomfortably. "We did not understand." "No," Paul said gently. "You didn't want to. You saw us as tools, not partners. And when tools become inconvenient, you set them aside." Chloe stayed quiet, watching the ocean. She missed Earth more than she realized. The smell of salt, the sound of laughter from a nearby house, the way the sun felt on her skin. It all felt like home in a way Xylos Prime never had. Krell bowed his head. "We are here to ask for your aid. Not as servants, not as advisors, but as equals. We will accept your terms. We will learn your ways. Just help us hold the galaxy together." Paul was silent for a long time. Then he looked at Krell, not with anger, but with something like sorrow. "We can't fix everything from here. The systems are too far gone. But we can send engineers. We can share updated protocols. We can train your people if they're willing to listen, really listen. Krell nodded quickly. They will. And, Paul added, you'll need to change how you see us. Not as a backup plan, not as emotional children, but as a people who chose to care when others chose to calculate. We will, Krell said. I swear it. Paul stood and walked to the edge of the cliff, looking out at the endless ocean. Earth spent 200 years trying to prove we belonged in your galaxy. Now we've learned we don't need to prove anything. We belong here, and if you want our help, you'll have to meet us as we are, not as you wished us to be. Krell rose slowly. Then let it be so. Before they left, Paul handed Krell a small data chip. This contains emergency patches for the Harmony layer. It'll stabilize the worst failures. But it's temporary. Real repair needs human hands on site. Krell accepted it like a sacred object. Thank you. As the dawn accord lifted off, Chloe looked down at the shrinking coastline. She saw Paul standing alone again, a small figure against the vastness of the sea. She knew she might never return to Earth, but she also knew something had changed, not just in the Council, but in herself. She was no longer just a translator. She was a bridge. Back in orbit, the human vessel that had guided them gave one final signal before turning away. Welcome to the next chapter. The envoy returned to Xylos Prime with more than a data chip. They carried a new understanding. In the council chamber, Krell stood before the delegates and spoke not of logic or efficiency, but of humility. He announced the Treaty of Sol, a new agreement built on respect, shared knowledge, and the simple truth that a galaxy cannot run on cold reason alone. And for the first time in centuries, the Council listened. The Treaty of Sol changed everything, but not all at once. Change came slowly, like dawn spreading across a dark field. The first human engineers arrived 3 months after the envoy returned, not in warships or grand vessels, but in quiet transports carrying tools, data cores, and open minds. They did not demand offices or titles. They asked only for access to the broken systems and the right to work alongside local teams. Marcus Bell was among them. He stepped onto Helios Minor for the first time in over a year, not as a stranded technician, but as a lead coordinator. The colony was still empty, the air thin and stale, but he didn't hesitate. He walked straight to the main processor hub, opened the panel with a familiar twist of his wrist, and began typing. Within hours, the machines hummed back to life. Oxygen levels rose. Green lights blinked steadily across the control board. The colony could be reoccupied within a week. On Xylos Prime, Chloe Wright stood before a new council, a mixed group of concordance delegates and human advisors. She no longer sat in the back. She spoke from the center, translating not just words, but ideas. When a Vorn engineer insisted on a rigid repair schedule, she explained why human teams preferred flexibility. Machines breathe, she said. They respond to stress, to weather, to time. You can't fix them like math problems. You have to listen. At first, many resisted. Old habits die hard. But then they saw results. The quantum relays stabilized. Trade ships moved safely through the Serpentis corridor again, guided by human pilots working side by side with Centauri navigators. On Viridia Station, a new biofilter, designed jointly by Lena Ruiz and Dr. Torrell, cleared the last traces of the mutated pathogen. No one died after that. Paul Dawson visited Xylos Prime once, not for ceremony, but for conversation. He met with Krell in a simple garden, far from the crystalline chamber where humanity had once been dismissed. They talked for hours, about governance, about ethics, about what it meant to build a galaxy that cared as much as it calculated. Krell admitted his past arrogance. Paul offered no blame, only partnership. Back on Earth, life continued peacefully. The world had not waited for the galaxy to come back. Cities had grown greener, energy cleaner, communities stronger. Humans had learned to rely on themselves again, and in doing so, they had rediscovered their own worth. They rejoined galactic society not because they needed it, but because they chose to, on their own terms. In the Concordance halls, something strange began to happen. During crisis meetings, when logic reached its limits, someone would pause and ask, what would the humans do? At first it was whispered. Then it was said openly. The phrase became a tool, not a joke. It meant look beyond the numbers. Consider the people. Leave room for hope. Chloe led training programs for young Concordance engineers, teaching them not just how human systems worked, but why they were built that way. We design for failure, she told a group of wide-eyed Vorn students. Because we know things break. But we also design for recovery, for second chances. That's the difference. Marcus, now stationed on a joint repair hub near the Cygnus Reach, trained teams from 5 species in field maintenance. He showed them how to read the subtle signs of machine fatigue, the slight hum before a relay fails, the flicker in a power line that means trouble is coming. It's not magic, he said. It's attention. Humans pay attention to what others ignore. Lena Ruiz returned to Viridia Station not as a savior but as a collaborator. She worked with Dr. Torl to build a new generation of biostabilizers, ones that could adapt without Earth's central node. We're teaching them to think, she explained, not just react. The project became a model for all future joint science efforts. High Arbiter Krell changed too. He no longer spoke of civilized space as if it belonged only to the logical. He welcomed emotion into council debates. He even allowed music, a human tradition during memorial services for those lost in the collapse. The first time a soft piano piece played in the crystalline chamber, many delegates wept. Though they did not know why, the galaxy did not become perfect. Disagreements still happened. Systems still failed. But now when something broke, no one pointed fingers. They gathered, shared knowledge, and fixed it together. The humans brought more than technology. They brought a way of seeing the universe as something alive, worth tending, worth caring for. Years passed. Children on Xylos Prime learned Earth history in school. Human stories were translated into every major language. A statue was erected in the Capitol Plaza, not of a warrior or a leader, but of a repair technician holding a wrench, looking up at the stars. It bore no name. It didn't need one. Chloe visited Earth once, years later. She walked the same coastal path where Paul had met the envoy. The oak tree still stood. She sat on the bench and watched the ocean just as he had. A young boy ran past laughing, chasing a dog. The air smelled of salt and pine. She smiled. Back in the stars, Marcus stood on the observation deck of the Cygnus hub, watching a human Vorn crew guide a freighter through a tricky asteroid field. They moved like one mind, calm and sure. He sipped his coffee, real Earth coffee sent as a gift, and felt a quiet pride. Paul never returned to galactic politics. He stayed on Earth, teaching, writing, living. But his words echoed across light years. The Treaty of Sol held, not because it was enforced, but because it was believed in. And the Council? They never forgot the silence that followed humanity's departure. They never again mistook kindness for weakness or emotion for error. They had learned the hardest lesson of all, that a galaxy built only on logic is a galaxy without a heart. Now, it had one again. And it beat in time with Earth's.